Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a subject that weighs heavily on many minds: mass shootings in America. It's tough, often polarizing, and our goal here isn't really about easy answers or taking sides.
Yeah.
We want to unpack the complexities using the information we have and try to move, beyond just the headlines.
Exactly. And we've got quite a bit to explore, everything from like how you even define it
Right.
to the stats, which are pretty stark, the contributing factors people point to, and the potential solutions being debated. You really have to look at it from all sides.
It says a lot that even the term mass shooting isn't agreed upon, doesn't it?
It really does.
One source mentions the FBI definition: 4 or more killed, public place, shooter excluded. But then there's the gun violence archive, much broader.
Right.
4 or more shot, killer injured, 1 incident.
And that difference, in scope, it's really crucial.
How so?
Well, it massively changes how we see the scale of the problem. An event with many injuries, even if fewer deaths, still causes huge trauma.
Absolutely. And looking at the gun violence archives numbers, wow, over 400 mass shootings in the U.S. in 2024.
Yeah.
Just in 2024. That's more than one a day. It's hard to even process that figure.
It truly is, and each one means lives just completely changed forever.
Yeah.
What's really striking and kind of disturbing is how these awful events can almost start to feel grimly routine.
That's a good way to put it.
You hear the names Parkland, Uvalde, Buffalo, and it just feels like this recurring nightmare.
That sense of a relentless cycle, I think a lot of us feel that. So, okay, let's start with one of the most talked about aspects: the sheer number of guns. Some estimates put it around 120 guns for every 100 people in the U.S. Top of the world per capita.
Way out in front, yeah.
Okay, so let's try and unpack what's behind that number.
Well, right at the heart of it, you have the Second Amendment, don't you?
Right. The right to bear arms.
And for many people, that's deeply connected to self-defense. That's the core principle.
Okay, and the argument often goes, it's not the guns, it's the people misusing them.
That's a very common perspective.
But then you look at countries like Australia or Japan with much stricter gun laws, and the difference in gun deaths is just enormous.
So why is it so hard to implement similar measures here? What's the resistance about?
Well, a big part is definitely cultural and historical. There's this connection many Americans feel to firearms tied up with liberty, self-reliance.
A very different history.
A very different history. And then there's the strong argument that restricting guns for law-abiding folks won't stop criminals.
Because they'll get them anyway.
That's the argument, yeah, that they'll always find a way. Look at Chicago. People say strict local laws, but still high gun violence.
And that Chicago example, it really shows how tricky state laws are when guns can just flow in from places with looser rules, right?
Exactly, like guns bought legally in, say, Indiana, ending up used in crimes in Illinois. It's a network.
A real tangled web. Okay, so this leads us to the specific types of weapons we often see in the deadliest attacks.
High-capacity semi-automatic rifles, like the AR-15 style. They seem to feature heavily when the casualty counts are high.
They do. And the reason they're often focused on is their design. They're built to inflict maximum harm quickly. Rapid-fire, large magazines.
I remember the Dayton shooting in 2019. 9 people killed in just over 30 seconds.
A horrifying example of just how devastating these weapons can be in such a short time.
So the argument for restrictions often focuses on that potential for mass casualties really fast.
Precisely.
But the counter-argument is that these specific rifles are used in, statistically, a small fraction of all gun crimes.
And that's true. Statistically, most gun deaths don't involve these particular rifles.
Oh, it's complicated.
It raises that difficult question. How do you effectively target certain types of firearms linked to mass shootings without, infringing on the rights of legal gun owners and while still tackling the broader gun violence issue? It's tough.
Okay, another factor that always comes up almost immediately after an event is mental health.
Yes, it's often the first thing people point to. This must have been someone with mental health problems.
And is there truth to that?
Well, it's true that in many cases, the shooters had shown signs of distress or had documented mental health struggles. But mental health issues exist everywhere, right? In every country.
Yeah, globally.
Yet the scale and frequency of mass shootings we see in America just isn't replicated in most other developed nations.
So what does that suggest?
Well, it suggests that while mental health can definitely be a factor, blaming it entirely might mean we overlook other really significant things.
Like the gun accessibility we were just talking about.
Exactly. Things that might be more unique to the U.S. context.
And there's another risk, too, isn't there? Focusing only on mental health.
Absolutely. It can end up stigmatizing people who genuinely need mental health support. And it can also shift attention away from other potential solutions, like those related to gun access or intervention strategies.
Right. It's not an either-or situation.
It shouldn't be, no. It's likely multiple factors working together.
Okay. We also need to talk about ideology and hate. This is deeply disturbing.
It is.
Some of these shootings, like Buffalo in 2022 targeting Black people, or El Paso in 2019 targeting Latinos, they were explicitly driven by extremist beliefs.
White supremacy, xenophobia, absolutely clear motives laid out.
And the internet seems to play a big role here.
It certainly can. Online spaces can, unfortunately, become echo chambers where these hateful ideologies get amplified, radicalization happens.
Even though the internet can also be used to counter hate.
Right, it cuts both ways.
Yeah.
But the radicalization aspect is a serious concern.
And these shooters often leave digital trails, manifestos, posts online.
They do, which raises huge questions about prevention, doesn't it? Could these signals be caught earlier? How do we intervene before hate turns into violence?
Which leads us right into prevention and intervention strategies. Red flag laws are one tool people talk about.
Extreme risk protection orders, they're sometimes called.
They allow temporary removal of guns from someone deemed a danger to themselves or others. Some states have them.
Yes, a growing number, but it's not universal across the U.S.
And they sound like a good idea on the surface, maybe, for prevention. But there are concerns.
Big concerns, yeah. Mostly around civil liberties and due process.
How do you balance public safety with someone's individual rights? It's a really fine line.
Exactly. How is dangerousness defined? Who decides? What's the process for appeal? These are critical legal questions.
Have they worked? Is there evidence?
There are cases, like one mentioned in California, where it seems a red flag law might have prevented a workplace shooting. But there are also criticisms about potential misuse or insufficient safeguards for the person flagged.
It's that balancing act again.
Always.
Another area linked to prevention, domestic violence.
Yes, this connection is really strong and often overlooked in the public discussion.
How so?
There's a significant correlation. Many individuals who commit mass shootings have a prior history of domestic violence or abuse.
So it could be a warning sign.
A potentially crucial one. Effectively identifying and intervening in domestic violence situations might be a key way to prevent future broader violence. It acts almost like an early warning system.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the human impact.
Yeah.
It's devastating.
It really is. It goes so far beyond the number killed or injured.
Survivors, the trauma they carry.
Oh, absolutely. PTSD, survivor's guilt, just lifelong psychological scars.
And whole communities are affected, right? That sense of safety just...
Shattered.
Completely. Think about schools. Active shooter drills are now normal.
Horribly normal.
Teachers talk about seeing anxiety levels rising in kids. It changes the whole atmosphere of learning. And that fear spreads out, doesn't it? People avoiding malls, concerts, everyday places.
It reshapes how people live their daily lives, that background fear.
And then there's the grief, the families who've lost people. Unimaginable.
Utterly unimaginable. And out of that grief, you see advocacy groups emerge.
Like Moms Demand Action, Everytown.
Exactly. Often started by survivors or family members pushing for changes like universal background checks.
But they face strong opposition.
Very strong. From gun rights groups like the NRA, primarily.
Which really highlights that fundamental clash we keep circling back to.
Freedom from violence versus the right to bear arms. It's a core conflict in American society.
And it often leads to political gridlock after these tragedies happen.
Almost inevitably, yeah. Intense debate, polarization, but often very little legislative action at the federal level.
So is there any middle ground? Any potential pathway forward?
Well, people keep searching for it. Certain policies, like universal background checks, do tend to have broad public support, even across party lines sometimes.
So that could be an area for agreement.
Potentially. The idea is to close loopholes, like private sales at gun shows, where checks might not be required in some places.
Makes sense on the surface.
But even there, you run into deep distrust, fears of a slippery slope.
Leading to confiscation.
Exactly. That fear is very real for many gun owners, and it makes compromise difficult, even on measures that seem moderate to others.
And that distrust seems tied into wider cultural divides too, right? Urban versus rural views on guns, for example.
Definitely. Huge differences in perspective, awfully based on lived experience and tradition.
And other divisions. Political, generational.
All of the above. Political polarization is obviously massive. Generational divides, too. Some data suggests younger people, like Gen Z, might be more open to reforms, maybe having grown up with this as a constant backdrop.
So if we try to synthesize potential ways forward, based on everything we've discussed, what are the recurring themes?
Well, closing gaps in the system keeps coming up.
Like the background checks.
Universal background checks, yes. And making red flag laws more widespread and maybe more effective while addressing those due process concerns.
And mental health.
Better funding and access to mental health care is almost always mentioned as part of a comprehensive approach. Not the only part, but an important one.
What about bigger picture stuff? Culture.
That's tougher, but yeah. Discussions about, the cultural glorification of violence, whether in media or online, that's part of the conversation, too.
Hard to legislate culture, though.
Very. But then there are more concrete things, like community-based violence prevention programs, investing in specific neighborhoods, addressing root causes locally.
And maybe just talking more between the different sides.
That seems crucial, doesn't it? Actually trying to bridge that divide between gun owners and reformers, finding ways to understand the other perspective, even if you don't agree.
It sounds simple, but maybe it's the hardest part.
Could be. And finally, I think amplifying the voices of survivors is incredibly important.
Why specifically?
Because their stories, their experiences, they cut through the politics. They remind everyone of the real human cost. Their advocacy is often incredibly powerful.
So summing up, it's clear mass shootings in America aren't down to just one thing.
Not at all. It's this complex mix: laws, culture, social divisions, individual factors, all tangled together.
No easy answers, no quick fixes. That seems undeniable.
Definitely not. But by really looking at all these interconnected pieces, maybe we can see potential paths forward.
Even if they're difficult.
Even if they're very difficult, yeah. Requires navigating some really deep-seated beliefs and overcoming major hurdles.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Considering everything we've unpacked, the stats, the laws, the culture, the human impact, what single aspect do you think holds the most potential for making a real difference, and why?
That's a good question to reflect on.
Something for all of us to think about as we continue to grapple with this uniquely American crisis. We really encourage you to keep exploring this, look at different viewpoints, and have those thoughtful, constructive conversations.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.